What's up everyone? In this video, we're going to go over how to use the root and global hooks in PayloadCMS. Before we get started though, don't forget to check that you're subscribed to this channel and make sure you hit the bell icon to get notifications for whenever a new video about PayloadCMS and more comes out. Now, let's dive in. Hooks are used to execute side effects from events performed in your PayloadCMS admin panel. This allows you to do things within the platform like populate fields with data from other fields, integrate with third parties, or perform other types of business logic. Hooks are what make PayloadCMS truly powerful and flexible because there's no limit to what you can pull off with hooks. With the right API keys and app IDs, you can integrate things like HubSpot, MailChimp, and Salesforce with fields in your PayloadCMS instance. You can build read-only fields using data from within your collection and even in relationships to that collection. You can even trigger revalidation for your collections and globals and accept payments using hooks. Hooks are executed on the server only. This means that you can include sensitive data in your hooks without fear of them being exposed to the client. You will, of course, still need to worry about exposing credentials if you publish your project to a Git provider, but you should handle that type of data with environment variables anyway. You also have the option to run any hook async or synchronously. Your use case will determine if you want to use async or not. If you need to fetch data from a third party, you may want to set the hook as async so you can ensure the hook completes before the next operation begins. Async hooks run in a series, so the next hook will always wait for the previous hook to complete before running. If you don't need to fetch data and perhaps just need to update a CRM or other third party, you may be okay excluding async from your hooks function. When a hook is not set to async, the payload operation will move ahead and not wait for the hook to complete before the next operation takes place. You define each hook by creating a hooks option and assigning an empty object to it. It's best practice to include a hooks directory at the same level you plan on applying the hook and creating a separate TypeScript file to then be exported and imported into the collection, global, or field you'd like to use the hook. There are 4 types of hooks available to you in PayloadCMS. We'll talk about 2 in this video and 2 more in the next video. We'll talk about root and global hooks today. We'll talk about field and collection hooks in the next video, so this one doesn't get too long. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to hooks. Root hooks are hooks that aren't associated with any specific collection, global, or field. You assign a root hook to the payload config file, and the only hook available to you here is afterError, which allows you to create a side effect if there is any kind of error at the application level. Since there's only one hook available to us in the payload config, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to create a new file just for this hook. So we'll just add it here to our payload config. We will scroll down to the bottom, add the hooks option, which will then have an empty object, and set afterError. And when we set afterError, we can open an array because we are able to chain hooks together. You're able to have as many hooks in this afterError array as you need. The afterError hook can take several arguments: error, context, GraphQL result, rec, collection, and result. You can use the error argument to log the error in the console for troubleshooting, or use try-catch statements to create different types of behavior when a specific error occurs. You can use rec to access the currently authenticated user and a local API instance of payload in order to query any of your collections. So to set this up, we will use a function, and we're going to pass in, we'll just say the error, and then we can just log error. While we don't have an error now, this would come in handy if there was an error taking place at the application level, and I'd be able to see what the issue is. So that's it for root hooks. Let's talk about global hooks. Global hooks run on global documents only. You can use these hooks to execute logic during specific operations and events that occur within the global config. Just like root hooks, you can add hooks to a collection by adding the hooks option and assigning an empty object to it. So we'll go ahead and set up our one global config with a hooks field, and we'll open it up with an empty object. All global hooks accept an array of asynchronous or synchronous functions, so you can have more than one function per operation, just as I mentioned for the afterError hook. Each global hook has their own arguments based on the type of hook, so we'll cover each of those in turn. To make a global hook, we'll create a hooks directory in the same folder of the global we want to create a hook for. So in our case, we have this header folder. We're going to open a new directory and call it hooks. And then we will create a new TypeScript file that we'll call index. And we're going to start with the beforeValidate hook. For beforeValidate, you'll want to import the global beforeValidate hook from payload. And then we're going to export const that we'll just call beforeValidate hook, which we will then set equal to an async arrow function and assign beforeValidate hook to our global beforeValidate hook from payload. And so as I mentioned, we have a couple of arguments that we can use for beforeValidate. We have our global, context, rec, data, and original doc. So here now within the function, we're able to access and use these arguments for anything that we want to do in this hook. This allows you to add or format data before the incoming data is validated as required or in the proper format. So for this first argument, global returns the global the hook is running against. In our case, that would return the header global. Data is the incoming data passed through the operation. This argument lets you access the fields available to you in your global document, which are all options you created. Original doc allows you to access the document before your changes are applied. This allows you to check for changes in your hook and do some kind of custom logic depending on the result. Lastly, the rec argument allows you to use the local API in your hook. You can use this to query your other collections and return data based on what you receive. You can also include custom context, but we won't cover that here. So now that we've exported this const beforeValidate hook, we can go over to our header config and we can add beforeValidate, and we can open up an array and we can import our beforeValidate hook, and we're good to go. So to show this off a little bit, let's just log our global, which is not going to do anything until we go into our header global and add any header link. So now when I hit save on the header, I can see the full global being returned here where I can access any of these fields. So now to see what we can do with this, I can say if global.slug equals header, we'll then log our global.admin.group. So here we'll see this one field be returned because our global slug equals header. And so we add a new header link and we see navigation returned as part of the operation. The next hook is beforeChange. This hook runs during the update operation after your submission is validated. Since your form data is validated, you can be confident that your data is valid document data and will be saved in the new document and not rejected. You're also able to intercept the data being saved in this stage to change the shape of the data before it's saved, as long as the data is valid. To make this hook, we'll use the same config file and import type global beforeChange hook. So I can just add it onto the end here. Global beforeChange hook, and we're going to open this up a little bit so we can just add those more easily in the future. And we're going to export another const that we'll call beforeChange hook and assign it to global beforeChange hook. And again, we'll set that equal to an async arrow function and then go over each of the different arguments. The beforeChange hook takes all the same arguments as the beforeValidate hook. So let's add, we have global, we also have rec, original doc, data, and of course context, which we won't go over. So in this beforeChange hook, we're just going to log our data, and nothing is going to happen in this hook until we import it over here into our header config. So we're just going to go and do beforeChange, open a new array, and import our beforeChange hook. And now when we save this and make a change here, we can save and then see the data that comes through for our header links. So I just talked about earlier what each of these different arguments did. So if you fast forwarded to this part or found it in a chapter marker, go back to the beforeValidate section to figure out what all of these different arguments do. So next up is the afterChange hook, which runs after your global is updated. Here, you know the file has been validated and updated, and now you can use the afterChange hook to clear caches or sync site data to your CRM. This is where you would perform on-demand revalidation for your global document. We'll come back to ODR soon in another video. The afterChange hook allows the global, context, and rec arguments just like the beforeValidate and beforeChange hooks. But there are two new arguments though: doc and previous doc. The doc argument returns the resulting document after your changes have been applied. You can use this argument to send a request to your CRM to update a contact's record, for example. The other argument, previous doc, can be used to show the document before any changes were applied. You can use this argument to compare to the updated doc and perform logic before returning anything. In our same config file, we'll import our global afterChange hook, and then we'll export a new const called afterChange hook and assign it to our global afterChange hook type. We'll set it equal to an async arrow function and apply our arguments, which again are rec, global, context, doc, and previous doc. And now here we can log our doc, which will return the updated document. But before this works, we need to head over to our header config and add an afterChange hook, and then we'll need to import afterChange hook into this array. So now we can save this, and looking over in our console here, we can make a change and then hit save. We now see the document up here at the top. Next up is the beforeRead hook. The beforeRead hook fires before all hidden fields are removed or localized fields are localized. You can use this hook's doc argument to work with the locales and hidden fields before you lose access to them on the front end. There are no new arguments here, only the global, context, doc, and rec arguments. So we'll jump right into creating this one. So we'll go ahead and import our global beforeRead hook. We'll export a new const that we'll call beforeRead hook, assign it to global beforeRead hook, then set it equal to an async arrow function with the following arguments. We have rec, doc, global, and context. And so here we'll log the rec. We'll go over to our header config, add our beforeRead hook, and import beforeRead hook here. And then let's comment out all of these other console logs and then see what beforeRead will return. So we'll come here, we'll make a change, we'll hit save. And here we see our beforeRead hook and all the fields that are available to us. The last global hook is afterError. This is the last step before the global is returned, and what you see on the admin dashboard is rendered. All locals are flattened, fields are hidden, and restricted fields are removed from unauthorized users. Global, context, doc, and rec are available to you in afterError, as well as two new options: find many and query. Find many allows you to check if this hook is running against finding one document or many, which helps when you have versioning turned on. Query returns the query of the request, which we can see when we log the result in our hook. So let's take a look. We'll comment out this console log. We'll add our global afterError hook. We'll export a new const that we'll call afterError hook and assign our global afterError hook and assign it to an async arrow function with the following arguments, which will be rec, doc, global, context, query, and find many. So since query and find many are new, let's go ahead and log our query and find many. So now we'll save this. And before this hook will run, of course, we need to run over to our header config and add afterError and add our afterError hook to that. And now we can save this, make a change over here and hit save. And we see undefined for both of those options. But just to be sure that this works, we can save doc, and we see here that while our query and find many are undefined, we see the document is returned. Hooks are probably the deepest yet richest concept in Payload. As you've seen, they are extremely powerful and flexible and allow you to extend the functionality of your application as far as your imagination will allow you to go. We've just scratched the surface of hooks in this video. We didn't even cover many of the use cases of these hooks. And we'll have even more to cover in our field and collection hooks video in the next video. But the real power comes in applying these hooks. I'll be creating a video with a couple of use cases for hooks shortly, so check to make sure you're subscribed to my channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss that or any other video I create around PayloadCMS and more. If this was helpful, like the content, share it with others who might find it helpful as well. If you'd like me to cover anything else specifically or have any questions, drop those in the comments. I'll see you on the next one.